100%. Let's get a little bit more technical now on the brush.
Sure.
Because I mean, all this knowledge is amazing, but I want to get into it because I know you have a new book. So actually, let's start there. Can you tell us about this new book and why you wrote it? I know there's a lot of drum material out there, but I'm you know, with your expertise, I'm excited to learn from this.
Yeah, so here's the thing. The book is called Jazz Brushes for the Modern Drummer, an essential guide to the art of keeping time. It's a tongue twister. So here's the thing. I felt that there were a lot of books out there about the brushes, but they weren't really helping people play the brushes because everybody would buy these books and they would still come to me and be like, how can I learn? And after my lessons, they'd be like, oh my God, I feel like I understand. So the first thing I want you to understand about the book that's important is that instead of me focusing on all the patterns and all the options, I focused on timekeeping. Because for me, the most important thing that a drummer is supposed to do is keep time. So why are we talking about 50 brush patterns when the reality is most of us are going to use 3, right? We're going to use the basic counterclockwise with no accent. We're going to use the counterclockwise with a 2 and 4 accent. And then we're going to use, you know, just add the ride cymbal pattern in, that traditional sweep. And then maybe the counterclockwise going the other way. But for the most part, every drummer that has ever played jazz, whether it's a cruise ship gig or wedding or whatever, you're going to use those 4 patterns. So instead of me dealing with expansion, I wanted to focus on how do we do that really well. The second thing that I felt that we had not, that had not really been addressed was truly the accompanying element of I am playing the brushes to accompany singers, trios, big bands, and all that. It's almost like the books that I'd seen before were almost like these drum, you know, pamphlets that were just, it was like an overkill or overzealous moment for a lot of drummers to just come together and just get off on each other. Exactly, you know what I mean?
Exactly. 100%.
So what I wanted to do was create the actual book that, like, if you were working with a singer, they were like, oh, wow, like, what did you need for that gig? So that was the second portion. The other thing I wanted to do was there were so many drummers that I felt that had not been talked about. Like when and I'm not going to, again, put anybody out there, but when I went and Googled during the process of researching for my book, when I Googled like what brush books had been out there, one, there were people putting out brush books that had never really done any gigs. And for me, how are you going to teach a subject that you haven't even perfected enough to get called to do? So for me, and listen, I'm just one of many, but to do a brush book and Kenny Washington's name never comes up, or Lewis Nash's name never comes up, or Jeff Hamilton's name never enters the field, or Peter Erskine, or, you know, Jeff Tane Watts, or, you know, even our living legends that are still around, you know, from Tootie Heap, all Roy Haynes, to mention a brush book and their names never enter the book, that is blasphemy to me. So, you know, so for me, what I wanted to then do was I wanted to pay my forefathers back. And I wanted to say, hey, those that are living and those that are gone, they helped this thing become what it is. And then also my peers, you know, Willie Jones Jr. and Greg Hutchison and Ari Honig and, you know, all these great drummers that are out there. Nobody's talking about them, but yet we're all online looking at the YouTube videos, watching them do it. Well, why is there no book about them? And then the last 2 pieces of it is the video component. I also felt that there were no brush books that actually sat the person down with a student and said, here are some pitfalls, how to fix it. So that's in there. And then the last 2 pieces are the piece of like it's a playlist. So literally I compiled over, I think either over 150 recordings, if not more, of just these drummers playing the brushes, you know, and that had not been done before. And then lastly, I created my own playlist where I created like a drummer list. So I basically played to like 20 original tunes. And then I created those same 20 tunes, and I removed the drums so that people can practice to those. So those are all the elements that I felt was missing from the brushes, because it almost felt like people were like bringing glory to themselves, versus I feel like all I did was I took the time to sit down and really point everybody in the right direction of here's all the people that inspired me, and here's all the things that made me the brush player that I am and that I'm seeking to still become. And let's all learn together, and let's like really put the attention on where this shit came from. It's like talking about bebop and you never mentioned Charlie Parker. And I think that's what's happening now is you got a lot of people who are building their brand and their media and their social media shit, but they're not really qualified to talk about this. And so I wanted to shift the conversation back to the people that created this art form. And that's what this book is.
Well, it sounds amazing. And I think you're right. I mean, I think some of the unique things you're doing that you mentioned are going to be very useful and really put the focus on what, is the fundamentals of using this, instrument. Yeah. Could you mention some common pitfalls? You don't have to give it all away.
For sure.
But if you could mention something about the brushes that, the jazz musicians out there, they have some brushes in their toolkit, but what's a pitfall they might often fall in?
The first thing I'll give them two. The first pitfall is that they never really solidify their technique, right? So there's two different levels of technique. I'm a believer in the traditional method of playing brushes, which means I hold mine like this, because that is what Papa Joe Jones has done, Kenny Clark, and all the great drummers. So that's the first pitfall, is that we don't hook our technique up. And many times what we do is we create options, right? So we're like, oh, well, I mean, this is what makes me feel comfortable. Well, if you go to Italy and you ask them how to make focaccia bread, they're not going to tell you what makes you comfortable. They're going to sit you down with someone older who's been making it for many years. And if you want to make it taste the way that you love it, you need to learn it the way that the tradition has been sort of explained, right? So that's the first thing. If you want to really play jazz brushes like on a high level, you need to learn the traditional way. Now, there is a way to do it match grip, but there's only a few guys, Bill Stewart and a couple others, that have been able to do it match and have the same sound. But again, so that's the first thing. The second pitfall is that most drummers don't play brushes along to a recording. They sit in front of a snare drum and they obsess over the snare drum and they just pick on themselves and they just go haywire, instead of saying, okay, let me listen to Vernell Fournier at Live at the Persian, Ahmed Jamal. Let me listen to him on But Not For Me, or let me listen to him on, music, and get the sound in their ear of, this is what it is to do it the right way. Or Elvin Jones on Tommy Flanagan's Overseas record, or Jeff Hamilton playing with Monty Alexander and Ray Brown. Get the sound in your ear of what it actually is. No BS. Then you go after that sound. So those are a couple pitfalls that I think that we make, again, just not taking the time, not really having the right technique. And then lastly, I'll say not getting the right kind of brush. And I don't want to go through a gear nerding, nerdathon, but there's only a couple brush companies that are making really good brushes. One is Vic Firth, another is Regal Tip. And I think ProMark is making a decent one. Vader makes a decent one, but off the top of my head, Regal Tip is the one that owns the patent to the original brush. So if you want to first learn how to play the brushes, go back to Joe Collato's model, because Joe Collato was the first guy that is responsible for a lot of the things that we call common on the brushes. He made that first patent. So again, I think those pitfalls are not having the right technique, not having the right kind of brush, not having the sound in your ear, and not really making sure that you have time to play with recordings or play with other people, because you're only going to get better with those things. So that's a couple of things.